Hello my dear friends, you are in the Military Reporter channel, and today we will discuss the situation in Ukraine on February 28, 2025. Today, we have a lot of very interesting updates, so let's start. This is a very important date for Ukraine and the United States of America because today, a significant agreement is going to be signed between the President of Ukraine and the President of the United States. Zelensky has arrived in the U.S. and his plane landed at Andrews Air Force Base at night. Zelensky is scheduled to meet with senators today, and later, he is going to have a meeting with Trump, followed by a signing ceremony for the agreement. This is very important because, due to this negotiation process and meeting, the Russians have decided to intensify their activities along the entire line of combat contact. Currently, the Russians are in the midst of a major offensive operation, and during the past 24 hours, they have significantly improved their positions. Let's discuss the details. Southern direction, Sioux direction. According to the information we have, during the past 24 hours, the Russians managed to take complete control of the settlements of Nova Serena. Additionally, the Russians captured the northern part of Store Serena, and this information was confirmed by both pro-Russian and neutral sources. Once again, the Russians continue their unstoppable offensive operation. Over the past few days, they have significantly improved their positions, and they are not planning to stop. Today, right before we started making this video, another pro-Russian and highly reliable source reported that as a result of the offensive operation, the Russians managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt in the area of Nka and into the central part of the settlement known as Mala VL. Most likely, during the upcoming nights between February 28 and March 1, the Ukrainian forces will be forced to retreat from this area and attempt to move as close as possible to the settlements of Kachia and the city of Sudra. However, the problem is that further southwest, another group of Russian forces managed to break through the Ukrainian defense belt and establish complete control over the settlement called Nuki. It is highly likely that the Russians do not plan to stop and will continue their offensive operation further toward the road between Mala Loa and Kazaki Loa. If the Russians succeed tonight in cutting this road, then the Ukrainian forces currently positioned in Mala will be trapped in a cauldron, without any possibility of evacuation. Most likely, this is exactly what the Russians are attempting to achieve over the next several days or even hours. As a result, this territory will likely fall under Russian control in the coming days. Further developments. According to the information we have, over the past 24 hours, the Russians have significantly improved their positions in the settlement of Lying. For the past 3 days, we have been receiving similar reports. First, we got confirmation that the Russians secured the westernmost part of the SLE settlement. Then, we received reports that they secured the central part of the settlement. Today, we got confirmation that the Russians have taken control of the most western part of the settlement. This information was provided by both neutral and pro-Russian sources. Furthermore, according to the latest reports, the Russians have not stopped their offensive operation. One Russian unit managed to push further eastward, and currently, heavy fighting is taking place on the outskirts of Kacha. These clashes are expected to be very intense, as the Ukrainians understand that they cannot afford to lose these positions. If the Ukrainians are forced to retreat from the northwestern part of Kazachok, it would not only mean a cauldron for Ukrainian forces in Mala, but it would also create a cauldron for much larger territories between Kazaki Loa and Mala VL. Additionally, according to the latest updates, the Russians have improved their positions in the village of Nova Novinka, which is already in the Sumy region. This information was confirmed by pro-Ukrainian sources today. For instance, the pro-Ukrainian service, Deep State, marked the territory of Novinka as a contested area or a gray zone, indicating that intense fighting is ongoing and that Russian forces have been recorded in the area. This information was also confirmed by NAL mappers. However, Russian sources report that no Russian or Ukrainian troops are currently stationed in the village itself, as it is a very small settlement with no defensive fortifications. Because of this, both sides are focusing on controlling the surrounding tree lines and fortifications. ###Southern Front updates. Throughout the day, we have received numerous reports about the situation in the southern front. However, we do not yet have precise geolocation markers for these developments. There were several articles published regarding these events, but we are still awaiting more concrete updates on this sector. The Russian side is currently conducting a powerful major offensive operation in the direction of Gwa. The Russians are attempting to force the Ukrainians to retreat from this area. If the Russians manage to take control of the settlement of Gwa and push the Ukrainians further west, it could mark the beginning of a complete disaster and the end for the armed forces of Ukraine in the territory of Sudzha. By launching this attack, the Russians will be able to shorten the distance to the main supply road number 7. This means that the Ukrainians will no longer be able to supply and support their forces in Sudzha without suffering losses. Now, let's move further and discuss the situation in the northern Kupiansk direction. Over the past 24 hours, we have received numerous updates. According to the available information, the Russians, as a result of their offensive operation, have taken full control of the settlement of Kalinova. This is a very small village that likely existed during the Soviet era but is now almost non-existent. Nevertheless, reports indicate that the village has been captured by Russian forces. Currently, the Russians are in a position to advance further in the direction of Kavkaz, and most likely, they will attempt to attack Golova next. When it comes to Golova, the Russians can advance along the main road connecting Kalinova and Golova itself. They may also try to cross the Askil River and attack the settlement from behind. This is already the beginning of the battle for the city of Kin. Over the past 24 hours, the Russians have destroyed several pontoon bridges and crossings in the area to reduce Ukrainian logistics capabilities. Simultaneously, Russian forces are attempting to cut off the pocket between the Askil River and the settlement of Stova Noesa. Currently, the Russians are trying to gain momentum in their offensive, moving from east to west. It is likely that in the coming days, we will see significant changes on the battlefield in this area as well. Furthermore, in the past 24 hours, we have received numerous videos showing Russian drones operating deep inside Ukrainian-controlled territory. Essentially, the Russians are attempting to assess what kind of forces the Ukrainians have in these fields, whether the Ukrainian forces in this region are capable of resisting or slowing down the Russian advance. Most likely, after collecting intelligence from these areas, the Russians will launch another major offensive towards the city of Volchan with the objective of cutting off this pocket from Ukraine and bringing the territory under full Russian control. Now, moving on to the southern front, over the past 24 hours, we have not received any significant updates. Regular military activities continue, including artillery strikes, Russian forces targeting Ukrainian positions, and attacks using FPV drones. These are routine operations. While the Russians may have plans for a large-scale offensive in this region, as of now, there are no clear indications that such an operation will occur today or tomorrow. Between the cities of Javier and TZ, we have received several concerning updates. First, let's discuss the city of Chavar. Over the past 24 hours, the Russians have significantly improved their positions. They have established control over almost the entire central part of the city and have strengthened their positions in the forests to the south. Reports from both neutral and pro-Russian sources confirm that significant territory has been captured. The Russians are now attempting to enter the settlement of Shenka. If Russian forces manage to penetrate this microdistrict, it will lead to a complete collapse of the Ukrainian defense. The Ukrainian forces, particularly the CS units, will likely be forced to regroup and evacuate their soldiers from the central area towards the settlement of Mykol, where they hope to establish a new defensive line to slow down the Russian advance. Additionally, Ukrainian forces have already begun a counteroffensive operation in the northern part of Chavar. The goal is to unblock key roads, streets, and buildings to facilitate the evacuation of Ukrainian troops trapped in the central part of the city. By successfully unblocking these areas, Ukrainian forces have improved their chances of safely withdrawing their troops via railway routes from Chavar towards Kata-Klos. Now, let's analyze the situation in the city of Taz. Over the past 24 hours, we have received several interesting and somewhat unusual updates. To compare, let's look at the maps from recent days. On February 24th, the situation appeared stable, with no clear indications of an imminent major development. The same conditions persisted on February 25. However, on February 26, Ukrainian sources reported that, as a result of a counteroffensive operation, the armed forces of Ukraine had established full control over the northern part of Taz. Several videos from both Russian and Ukrainian sources supported this claim, prompting analysts to adjust the tactical maps in favor of Ukraine. However, by the end of February 26, there were still doubts about the authenticity of the footage. It was unclear whether the videos showed a fresh offensive or just a small pocket of resistance that Russian forces were attempting to neutralize. By February 27, more updates from the area began to clarify the situation. By the end of February 28, we had a complete picture of what was happening in the city. According to available information, just before a scheduled negotiation between Donald Trump and Zelensky, the Ukrainian armed forces launched several counterattacks in the area of the siege of Tetsk. The aim was to strengthen Ukraine's bargaining position ahead of the talks. It appears that the Ukrainians were able to achieve some of their objectives. As we can see, the tactical map has changed significantly, with almost the entire northern part of the city shifting under Ukrainian control. The Ukrainian forces are also attempting to counterattack the Russians in the western part. Now we see that the defense line of the armed forces of the Russian Federation has been broken. It is now going to be very difficult for the Russians to hold their lines because there is a very high chance that if the Ukrainians increase the pressure, they may encircle and cut off several Russian groups, which could lead to a complete collapse of the defense. Obviously, we do not think that the Ukrainians are planning to counterattack in this area with the purpose of restoring control over the city of Tetsk. Clearly, the main goal of the armed forces of Ukraine is to secure better positions during the negotiation process. Zelensky just wants to demonstrate that he still has power, that his army still has the capability to counterattack, and that they can achieve very good results. Therefore, this counterattack in the area of Taz will be presented to the President of the United States, Donald Trump, as a significant victory over the Russian army. Anyway, let's wait and see what happens next. If the situation continues to develop in the same way, it is highly likely that the CR will increase pressure, as we can already see that they have significantly improved their positions. Nevertheless, let's see what the Russians are going to do in response because now they need to bring in additional forces to stabilize the situation. Most likely, the Russians will be forced to redeploy forces from the area of Chavar since this is the closest location where they are on the offensive and can use operational reserves to stabilize the front and push the Ukrainians back from the territories they managed to recapture. As for the P direction, over the past 24 hours, we have not received any major updates. We have only seen multiple videos showing the Russians withdrawing Ukrainian positions in different towns and various parts of the city. No significant activities have been reported near Penka, which suggests that both the Russians and Ukrainians were regrouping. The most important updates are coming from the south. According to available information, the Russians have significantly improved their position and have taken complete control over the settlement of Zaporozhye. Furthermore, they have attempted to advance further toward the settlements of Trit and have tried to encircle the settlement of Prina. However, by the end of February 28, the Ukrainians managed to slow the Russians down, repel several attacks, and force them to retreat. There are numerous videos showing the Ukrainians counterattacking the Russians in this area, targeting the soldiers attempting to advance further along the river Sanka. Comparing the maps from February 27 and February 28, we see an adjustment of the contested area in favor of the Russians. Now, let's discuss the situation in the southern direction. Over the previous 24 hours, there has been a significant increase in the number of flags marking Russian advances. We have counted 12 flag icons, indicating that the Russians have substantially improved their position. For comparison, on February 27, the Russians were still far from the settlements of PR, Baska, and SC. However, by the end of February 28, they had advanced significantly. The most important development was the capture of the village of Privel by the Russians, which has been confirmed by pro-Ukrainian sources. Additionally, the settlement of Batka was also captured by Russian forces, and this information was similarly confirmed by pro-Ukrainian sources. Regarding the losses of the armed forces of Ukraine, several pro-Russian sources reported that the settlement of Skna was also captured and secured by the Russians. This suggests that the first defensive line in the Shenka direction has collapsed under the pressure of the Russian armed forces. So far, we have not received any confirmation through official channels that can verify Russian progress, but there is a noticeable gap between the Russian-controlled areas as indicated by different mapping sources. This gap, in some places, extends up to 4 to 5 kilometers. Typically, when such a gap exists, it suggests that the Russians might have advanced even further into Ukrainian-controlled territory. This marks yet another breakthrough, and it is evident that the Ukrainian defense is rapidly collapsing. At this point, it is difficult to determine where the Ukrainians plan to make a stand and attempt to slow down the Russian advance. However, due to the Russians' rapid progress, it is unlikely that the Ukrainians will be able to halt them without reinforcements. The Ukrainians now need to bring additional forces into this area to stabilize the situation. The nearest sector from which they could pull reinforcements is the Zaporozhye direction. However, if the Ukrainians decide to redeploy forces from Zaporozhye to the South Danes direction, it could allow the Russians to launch another offensive in the Zaporozhye sector. We know that over the past 24 hours, the Russians have already begun advancing in this area. As a result of intense fighting, the Russians secured the settlement of Putki. This clarifies that the main objective of the Russian offensive in the Zaporozhye direction is to tie down Ukrainian operational reserves in this region and prevent them from being used to stabilize the situation in the South Danes direction. Since the Ukrainians are unlikely to redeploy these forces, they will be forced to pull reinforcements from elsewhere. Perhaps they will transfer troops from the Pax direction, but if they do, this will give the Russians the opportunity to intensify their activities there and potentially advance even deeper into the Dnipro region. The situation remains very difficult for the Ukrainians. Their main problem now is finding enough reserves to stabilize the situation. Thank you for watching. Please subscribe to my channel, leave a like, and have a great day. Bye-bye.